Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to LogiSYM 2021. My name is Markus Kraft. I have the pleasure to moderate this afternoon sessions. We're starting with track 1, Ocean Visibility, Predict with Intelligence and Analyze with Depth. The disruption of the 2020 global pandemic reinforced visibility as a dominant topic in the supply chain. And even so, lately with the impact on Suez Canal, the delays show clearly that we need to look beyond the surveys. With me is David Strauss, Global Director on Strategic Partner Development for E2Open. He joined the company in 2014. He has over 18 years experience working and engaging with global customers and their supply chain teams. With his in-depth knowledge on the up and downstream of the supply chain, he's a sought-after leader in this field. And I'm looking forward to his presentation on that topic. David, over to you.
Thank you very much, Markus. Hello, everyone. Glad you could join us today. Let's get stuck right in. So the title of the presentation is also our agenda. And because we're talking about ocean, I didn't call it an agenda. It's an ocean voyage, which will have 3 legs. And we'll start with visibility, go on to prediction, and then go to analysis. There should be a poll popping up somewhere on AirMeet, a very simple one. So if you could take the opportunity to answer that one, make it a little bit more interactive. I'll be getting to back to those answers in just 5-6 minutes. Right, ocean visibility. Before we get to ocean visibility, let's talk about supply chain disruption. You heard Suez mentioned. We'll be talking about that several times. But even before Suez, I just did a Google Trends search yesterday, and if you look at supply chain disruption over the past 5 years, you notice there's a sort of base load, which any Google results, and then there's a massive spike about a year ago. I want to say March 2020. So we know which one that was. That was COVID. And then there was a second spike, very noticeable here. And we, I think, know what that was. I'll get to that in a moment. So the first spike was COVID. And if you Google also supply chain COVID, all of you get many more hits than you used to, and all the big players, Strategy and McKinsey, various consultants, strategic consultants, papers, people like LogiSYM were doing a lot of publications and commentary around that. And it was interesting. I've been in supply chain, I think, like Markus mentioned, for almost 20 years now. And when I told people what I did, I work in supply chain, I often got blank stares. Nobody knew what supply chain was. Ever since COVID at the latest, people know what it was. Politicians were talking about it. Even Angela Merkel, I'm from Germany, was talking about supply chain. So that was the first news of putting supply chain in the front. The second one that really put it on everybody's screen, not just the specialist, was this little event. As you know, the Ever Given from Evergreen had a little mishap in the Suez Canal. Indeed, if you purely Google Suez Canal, you don't look for evergreen or blockage, almost all of the hits are actually of this disaster. I'm sure that the Suez Canal marketing department is not very happy about their organization being associated with this. Now, it's all a bit funny and joking here, but it had serious impacts. And what we're seeing here is literally the fact that how supply chains, how important they've become, how long, how interconnected, and how especially the ocean leg, when you talk about long distance, Asia to Europe, Asia to the US, how unbelievably important it is and very much underappreciated. If you're not in logistics, if you're not in supply chain, you don't even know that this exists. Well, now people know that this exists. And because it was an underestimated part, people didn't have visibility, so they were quite wrong-footed. If I could, let me see the result of the poll there. How do I see the answers? Can somebody read those out to me? Okay, here we go. We have almost exactly 2/3 of the people affected by the Suez Canal crisis. That's a good number, and I suspect some of the 1/3 that were not affected may be our colleagues from academia or from software companies or consulting like myself. So this is what people should have had: ocean visibility. This is the normal traffic which we can see in our E2Open logistics visibility solution, and I'm using ours as an example. I'll be purely transparent. You get very similar solutions from lots of other companies, software providers like E2Open, but also your 3PL or your carrier. You can get this if you actually invest the time and attention and say, I need ocean visibility. So what does it give you? It tells you, well, this is what it looks like before, and this is what it looks like when a boat gets stuck. We literally, in real time, we track this satellite data from the ships. We could see the traffic jam that was making the world news. So that's already visibility. And not all events around ocean will make the news. So having visibility like this gives you more insight. You know that certain things are happening. For instance, port congestion is a classic, which we're seeing everywhere, a lot happening on the west coast of the US. We also were able to see other things because you get the planned voyage data from the carrier. Well, you saw that this was the original planned voyage, because they give us the stops where that particular voyage is going to go. And as the Suez crisis evolved, you started seeing this sort of thing, that people were entering the Suez Canal and saying, nope, that's not going to work, and going around the Horn of Africa. Again, without visibility investment up front, you will be struggling because everybody else will be phoning the ocean carrier to get their updated information. Yeah, so just a note, again, on E2Open, we're just one, but we're a very strong provider. A few years ago, we merged together with the brand Intra. They've been doing this for 15 years, connecting to hundreds of carriers, millions of data points. And that's relevant not as a commercial for my employer, but for our next section. Next section, sorry, is about predicting with intelligence. So just now it was showing the as is state, which is the first step, which already has value and can be helpful to help you detect trouble. But prediction is then the next step. And we have a second poll now in the chat. So if you could answer that one, that would help the discussion along. So when you talk about predicting, some people will jump in straight into machine learning and AI, and it's all like Google Maps, etc., etc. Now, that's absolutely valid. There's, again, not just us, many providers out there. But before you even go there, you have to extend the visibility from purely ocean, where possible, to the upstream legs. So you have the feeder legs, which go to the port. You have the actual ocean transport. You have the drayage legs. But there's other processes which might impact your final time of arrival. Our dear friends at customs, always fast, always very collaborative. They can add hours, days, or weeks to a transport. If there is consolidation, deconsolidation, final packaging, manufacturing steps, the more steps of the supply chain you can model, the better you are at predicting ETA, because you can say, okay, this particular ship in Suez is going to arrive a week late. I can then add the offset of the other legs to give my end customer or consumer a true estimated time of arrival. And the data which might disrupt you could include country political risks, labor, weather, all kinds of other things. Now, when we really come to ocean prediction, this is what we do: is on the one hand, to show that visibility which we just had, we do data integration. That's what allows to do the visibility. And then we apply artificial intelligence. So in the case of Intra, because they've been doing this since the 2000s, we literally have 150 million-ish, or maybe more. It's in the hundreds of millions of lines of data about actual voyages, not just what actually happened, but what was the communicated planned date by the carrier. So we saw, what did they say when they leave the port, when they left the port, what was the predicted arrival date, and then what actually was actually happening. And then we compare those carrier ETAs with the actual delays which happened. We also add weather data and other things, and we feed that into our predictive AI. So it's an artificial intelligence which looks for patterns, which looks for correlations, and says, well, you know what? I'm not going to name any names, but Ocean Line M on this particular leg with this particular ship at this time of year with these weather conditions always over promises their arrival dates by 2 days. So our predictive ETA will add those 2 days and said, you know what, if they're saying it's going to be Tuesday, expect it to be Thursday. And that's updated every few hours. And yeah, we're seeing some very good results out of that stuff. Other things which we see ourselves in this world is the multi-stop tracking, like I just mentioned. There's a pre-leg, there's a main leg, there's onward leg, very often multiple onward legs. So that having the ability to see that, not something exclusive to us. Again, there are other providers which can give that to you. Your 3PL, if you're in a strong 3PL model, may be able to give that to you. You can get the data directly from the carrier, build your own analytics if you have the budget for that. And then last but not least, this is where we now pivot from visibility prediction, which is still looking, right? Looking is not supply chain. Supply chain is about control, right? And the control begins with, well, where do I have to act? Right. So is a particular shipment late? That's an exception. That's something I want to look at. So out of the, let's say I got 1,000 containers or 10,000 containers on the ocean at any one time, I want the system to only alert me to those ones which actually have an issue, which might only be a handful, 10, 20, 50. So management by exception, always an important one. And by the way, we always talk about delays in logistics. Early arrivals can be as much a problem. Your customs broker isn't ready, the crane isn't rented, your trucker is not there. So early can actually be a disruption as well. A couple more clever things around the artificial intelligence. We cluster ports. So when we talk about the ocean leg, to just enrich the set of data that the AI has to chew on, we cluster together, let's say, all the Middle Eastern ports as one virtual cluster, which is going to take the same main route along the journey, just like the target clusters. Doesn't matter where they are in Norway, we'll treat them from an AI perspective as one location, because that gives us more data to look at together from the main leg, and we can say, well, every Lebanon to Oslo is delayed in Gibraltar. It's pretty likely that Tel Aviv to Bergen is also going to behave, and we do that somewhat geographically, and the algorithm also trains itself on that. And then we do the same thing along the temporal axis, right? So vessels that are traveling at the same time along a particular journey are also grouped in together in clusters, because there's a difference whether you're traveling from the Middle East to Oslo in, let's say, March, or whether you're doing it October when you have the storms. And let's have a look at that poll quickly. Where are we doing? So the question was, whoops, daisy. Oh, I must have miscommunicated the question. Affect you more westbound or eastbound? So let's assume that westbound was yes and eastbound was no, and we have 20% don't know, right? So we have 20% who might not have had visualizations or analytics like I've just been describing. So on a macro level, they're just reacting shipment by shipment rather than detecting, okay, the mass of my problem is westbound. In the case, the numbers I have here, it's over twice as many westbound transports have an issue compared to eastbound. So that's where I'm going to put my manpower. I have limited logistics planners. I have limited ability to intervene. So having this sort of analytics where you can see which routes have my biggest volume, which carriers do I have most traffic with, that's a sort of analytics which you then build on the visibility, on the prediction, to be able to actually react. And yeah, that's why we do the prediction, is to predict disruptions earlier than they happen and try to react as early as possible, because we know in logistics, when you react earlier, it gets cheaper to fix. And yep, still well on time. Last one, analyze with depth. So we've looked at it with visibility, we've predicted it, we've extended our visibility across time, and now we're going to look about the analysis. What can we do with this data? So please hit our third poll, and I will answer that as a medium, because I have to answer it, otherwise I can't see the answers. I see the answers rolling in there. So visibility is useful. even with prediction, but it's not enough. Visibility tells you where's my stuff. The real question is, so what if it's late? There's a gigantic difference whether you've got a pallet stuck on a ship, which is late, somewhere in a container, which is replenishing a safety stock somewhere at the target destination. Now, safety stock violations make you feel unsafe, but they don't actually kill your revenue. Whereas if that component is actually part of a promised order, then that is a much bigger problem than the safety stock. So this so what question, that is where the analysis with depth comes in. Just as an example, we all heard in the media that the Suez Canal company or the Egyptian government was losing 9 billion a day because of no ships going through the canal because of the penalties or because they weren't getting the tolls. Our estimate is that the downstream impact can be 100 to 1,000 times greater, which is normal. Your logistics cost is normally a very small proportion of your supply chain cost. And why do we say that? Well, imagine that one small switch. It's an exaggeration, but not by much. We know that there were production lines of automotive manufacturers in Europe that were affected because some components were just not making it over from Asia. And as you know, the production downtime of an automotive line is measured in the tens of $1,000s an hour. That's kind of what the penalties, that's what the costs are. So from a 9 billion, well, we have less revenue from the ships paying to go through this particular lane. The actual economic impact on a macro level is 10 or 100 or even more times higher. And so what we did as E2Open together with Dun & Bradstreet, I hope you know Dun & Bradstreet, they're a huge data analysis, data aggregator company, we overlaid both of our data sets. So because we have such a large amount of ocean data at E2Open, and they had detailed annual statistics on what is traveling from where to where, we were able to do a cross-section of that and work out exactly what we see in the polls, in the second poll, that indeed the westbound was much more affected. And we were even able to break that down by industry, so that the household products were heavily affected. And I mentioned this is Wall Street Journal because we E2Open and Dun & Bradstreet, we published this research, and then a number of publications, I'll show where to find those, picked those up and made their own analysis and their own commentary and their own inference. The Wall Street Journal here really did have a very nice visualization. So yep, that's the one. This was from a different paper using the same data and twisting it in a slightly different way. So westbound, really across the board, everything was affected. Food, pharmaceuticals, industry, especially auto, heavily influenced. We see how certain, not just China, right? Vietnam and India, you can see how they become powerhouse suppliers to the United States. On the eastbound, so that, and again, this reflects what we had in the second poll, the hit was maybe deeper, but across somewhat fewer industries, which mirrors the experience which you have. And just in case you want to read up on that, just for your own education, you go to e2open.com and you go to newsroom media coverage, and you have all of these articles, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, American Shippers, including things like the breakdown, which industries were most hit and which continents were most hit. And that's what we mean by analyze with depth, right? Now we are no longer saying, well, logistics has got a problem. Now we can see which industries in which country have which problem. And this ties us very, unfortunately at this stage, very well to our poll, where I see that 15%, that's 1/5, so less than 1 out of 5 companies had the ability to actually assess the business impact. They knew something was going wrong in Suez, but they didn't know what the impact was going to be. There's a rock solid 40% who had somewhat well, so we'll say half of the companies had some way, but almost half, 45%, were just at the mercy of, well, I sure hope that ship starts moving again. And it's not even the evergreen one, it's all the other ones backed up behind. So the encouragement there is to really connect the dots. Don't see logistics in isolation. I'll close with this. The call to action. For far too long, logistics has been seen as a business function, especially ocean, where you put a container in a place somewhere in Asia and it magically reappears 6 weeks later somewhere in Europe or somewhere in the US. And then when you open the container, then you see what's inside, which pallets, and then you go and read the shipment number, and the order fulfillment process goes on along its way. Our recommendation, and it's not just ours, read Gartner, read ICT and other people like that, and they will tell you, connect that logistics data. Try to gain the data, what is in which container. Obviously, get the visibility from your ocean and logistics partner, but maintain that linkage between the actual business, the purchase order, the inventory location, things like that, and the logistics to be able to really serve your production quality, your service quality, and ultimately your revenue and profitability. Because guess what? We've had multiple of these disruptions over time, and there's more of them coming. That's it. I think I'll leave that on the slides, and this would allow us then to go over to the chat. We have a solid almost 10 minutes for the Q&A.
Yes, good afternoon. David, can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly, thank you.
Yes, I'm on my side. I'm not sure if I'm visible to the audience, but yes, a few interesting questions were raised. We can see that we have a lot of experts and people who are dealing with these scenarios you described and discussed. And a few questions popped up, and I just want to read them out as they came in. So we're hopping a little bit through the three topics you had, but I hope that it's easy for you to come across. The first question which was raised came, how can the system project based on port backlogs and how fast customs at these ports process shipments? Sometimes there seems to be a bottleneck. So the question is also addressing the infrastructure at landside, how the system is engaging, or how can you help there?
Yeah, great question. And it goes to my very last point. In the orange here, I have the ocean, right? And you see, normally they will also tell you when it's actually been unloaded. So if the more legs you get, or rather the more shipment status you get, you can detect port congestions in, when it comes to crane equipment, for instance, by tracking that final unloaded leg. That's one. In our case, we also have the ability to get customs and model that as an other leg. In the terms of predictions, what happens is we cannot always predict it shipment by shipment by shipment, but because we have such a large data set, we're not just looking at your congestion data, we're anonymizing the data of everything else that's flowing in that port, and we can see that normally, let's say, from the ship being at quayside to the goods being unloaded to them being customs cleared, let's say that's 2 days, and we're seeing everybody in this location is now at 4 days, our prediction would then add that offset. I saw that we've lost Marcus. I'll take the questions in his stead. The last one we had there from Andrew Lee: how do we verify the theoretical number with a predictive computer with the actuals on the ground? It's actually the reverse. So we started as an ocean real-time status visibility. That was our first product 15 years ago. That's what people were interested. So we have all of the what actually happened for every transport. We get the current status with the date, and we get the predicted status of the next event, and that keeps evolving. So we constantly have a set of what was predicted, what was actually happening, what was predicted, what was actually happening. And without that, we couldn't do the machine learning prediction, because that's how it trains itself. It says, what did I predict last time when I saw this set of numbers? Was that a good prediction? Yes. Okay, I'll increase the statistical weighting of those factors. If it was not a good number, then I'll reduce the weighting and pull something else up, which was more predictive. Doing predicting ETD change to be more valuable than ETDA. Okay, I've got 2 of these. from Ishan and Alice. Let me grab this. Hang on, I'll put this over here.
Thank you, David, for jumping in.
Yeah.
I was
You want to take the next one?
No, please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. So on the estimated time of departure, so two things. That's actually a good question. I need to take that back to my product management and see where they're working. So we predict ultimately the ETA because that's where people see the most value. However, when we're doing milk run kind of shipments, I don't see why we shouldn't be able to correct the ETD. So I think you've just invented a new product for us. I will go back to our product management because I know that we predicted, because the arrival of a ship, a ship is never point to point. They always have 20 legs in a row. So the arrival of one that we predict, it influences departure of the next leg along. So I'll take a note. Maybe I'll come back next year and present a predictive estimated time of departure. There we go. How would the system help in today's ocean world where carrier reliability is an all-time low and huge backlogs in transit ports? We cannot solve that because we don't own the ships. What we can help with, and we are helping with, is the understanding, right? We understand the impacts, and as our customers who have invested heavily, for instance, in predictive ETA, and especially in the things that go with it, like order promising or inventory projections, they are able to see much earlier the disruptions. So they are able to see a port congestion before the ship has even left on the other side of the planet. So they have been building up their inventory levels. They've been, in some cases, unfortunately, scheduling airlifts. They're also doing in-region cross shipments, things like that. They're communicating with their customers and say, hey, I can only deliver 2 out of these 3 orders. Which one would you like? That's service quality sometimes can be that. If you can't hit OTIF, communicate with the customer and find out the one which has the highest value to the customer. So that's where our systems come in, because again, logistics is no longer disconnected from complete supply chain. I have one here from Marcus. How does the technology connect with CRM and legacy systems to ensure all participants connect? Marcus, hit me up after this event and I'll give you an E2Open introduction. In a nutshell, we connect to everything. We've just been put on the leader quadrant again in Gartner's multi-enterprise supply chain business network. We're a long way on the top right. We have hundreds of thousands of connections, and especially we have the ability to connect to anything. I've got AS400 still. I've got IBM AS400 systems hooked into the mainframe. I've got some sexy backflip 360 web service with JSON and XML and everything in between, with all the IDOC and EDIFACT you've ever seen. It's a fair question, though, because that capability is necessary and often underestimated.
The questions, may I add on? The question was,
yes, please.
It is on the data feeds, because as the question what the audience asks is transit ports, for example. That was as long as the carrier can submit this data, you can show and you can work with it. What we know from the carrier perspective, a lot of carriers do not always transmit this information. And that makes then I think the challenges ahead.
I think that's a very valid question. I can answer it with the port congestion. We cover, hundreds of carriers in ocean, and there's about 100 which we have very, very tight integration with. So when a port gets congested, everybody gets affected. So even if we're only seeing 10 or 20% of the actual traffic heading for, let's say, this cluster over here, we know that the other 80% are going to hit everywhere, because we recognize the pattern as a port congestion, which is not dependent on a particular ship or a particular ocean line. It's a general localized issue. And so that becomes an additional calculation factor in the ocean prediction. So thank you for redirecting my ship there to the correct port of destination. And we are 1 minute from the end. I want to thank everybody, also Kraft, for moderating and picking me up on the questions. And very much like to thank the audience for helping us coming up with a potential product of predictive ETD. That's great, great input. That's what these symposiums are for.
That's what the symposium is about. Thank you very much, David, for the session. Thank you, everybody, for listening in. And please stay tuned for the next session very soon. I will dial off for now. Thank you very much. Goodbye.